Where's the... Here, hey, give me your hands.
Child molester.
Give me your hands. Give me your hands.
Oh, Jesus. He's got me.
Let go of it. Give me your hands. Give me your hands.
Yeah, you got it.
Give me your hands. If you do anything, I'm gonna sock you, all right?
That's
copy?
Yeah,
all right. Get out of the car. I got a deputy behind you. Step out of the car. That's all you gotta do.
She was 32 years old. She had a phone in her hand and she was filming. Not because she wanted to document something for history, not because she thought anyone would ever watch it. She was filming because she was terrified and she had no one else to call. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she believed that the camera might be the only witness left standing when it was all over. Her name was Silvia Galva. She was Brazilian-born. She was living in Broward County, Florida. She had a laugh that people remembered. She had a life that was still being built, still being figured out, still moving forward one day at a time, the way most lives do when you are 32 and the world still feels full of possibility. On the night of July 27th, 2019, that life ended in a bedroom, not in a dark alley, not in a parking lot at 2 in the morning, not in some stranger's car. In a bedroom she had helped decorate. The man across the room from her was someone she had chosen, someone she had trusted, someone whose name she would speak in those final video clips, not with hatred, but with exhaustion. The exhaustion of a woman who had been through this argument before and was tired of having it again. His name was Adam Crespo. He was 49 years old. When the paramedics arrived, Silvia Galva was on the floor. A friend was performing CPR on her chest, pushing down again and again with trembling hands, while blood spread across the carpet beneath them. She did not survive. What she left behind was a video, and that video would become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence ever presented in a domestic violence case in the state of Florida. This is her story, and we are going to tell it the way she deserved to have it told, with honesty, with care, and with the weight it has always carried. It started the way a lot of terrible nights start, with drinks, with laughter, with the ordinary rhythm of two people who had been together long enough to stop noticing the small things that were already broken between them. Adam Crespo and Silvia Galva had gone out that evening. A bar. Nothing unusual about that. Broward County is full of places where people go to unwind, to decompress, to let the week fall off their shoulders for a few hours. They were a couple. They shared an apartment. To anyone watching them walk in that night, they would have looked like any other pair. But couples carry things with them that strangers cannot see. They carry old arguments that never got resolved. They carry money problems that sit under the surface like rocks under shallow water. They carry the memory of every time one person said something that cut a little too deep and the other person smiled and pretended it had not. Adam was 49. Silvia was 32. 17 years between them. That gap is not itself a problem. Age differences exist in many healthy relationships, but in a relationship that is already struggling, that gap can quietly reshape who holds the power and who does not. What happened between them at the bar that night, in terms of exact words and looks and small escalations, we do not know in full detail. What we know is that they came home, and something had shifted between them. The apartment was in Broward County. They had shared it. Their names, their routines, their belongings were all woven into the same space. It was a home in the practical sense. But the moment they walked through that door, it stopped feeling like one. Silvia went for her phone. She had been in difficult situations before. She knew that when things started going wrong with Adam, they could go very wrong very fast. There is something devastating about that knowledge, about the moment when a person who loves you becomes someone you need to document. She started recording. And with that single act, she began the most important thing she would ever leave behind. What comes next is preserved on video, and it is not easy to watch. There is always a moment, a point where the story could have gone a different way, where someone could have walked into another room, where someone could have said the one thing that slowed the temperature down instead of raising it, where the night could have ended in silence and frustration instead of blood. In this case, that moment came early. The argument was about money. Specifically, it was about who paid the rent. This is not a minor detail. When you understand what was really being said, the argument takes on a different shape. Adam wanted Silvia to leave. He wanted her out of the apartment, and the rent dispute was his leverage. His way of saying, this space is mine, not yours, and I can make you go. For Silvia, this was not just an argument about money. It was an argument about whether she had the right to be in the only home she had. She was trying to hold her ground. You can hear it in her voice on the video. She is not screaming. She is not throwing things. She is tired and she is scared, and she is trying to argue with logic because logic is the only weapon she has that does not require hurting anyone. Adam had something else in the room. The bedroom of that apartment had a particular decoration. On the wall, displayed like something from a museum or a fantasy film, were two spears. Each one was roughly 5 feet long. Each one had a metal blade at both ends, sharp on both sides. These were not toys. These were not plastic replicas. They were real, they were heavy, and they were designed to cause serious harm. No one has ever fully explained why those spears were there. They had been part of the room's aesthetic for some time. The kind of decoration that looks dramatic in a photograph and unsettling in person when someone is angry. At some point during the argument, Adam picked one up. That is the moment. That is the first wrong turn that could not be undone. Because once a weapon is in someone's hand, the entire conversation changes. Every word after that carries a different weight. Every step backward or forward means something different. The space between two people becomes something else entirely. Silvia kept filming. She kept trying to reason with him. And the spear stayed in Adam's hands. What happens next is fast. That is the thing about violence. It takes so long to build toward, and then it happens in seconds. And those seconds feel like they belong to a completely different kind of time. The video on Silvia's phone captured the argument as it escalated. Adam's voice, his posture, the spear in his grip, and Silvia holding the camera, her breathing steady, because she was still in the part of this where she believed it was going to stop, where she believed that logic would eventually land, that he would hear himself, that someone would come to their senses. He told her she needed to leave. She told him she was not going anywhere. He told her she did not pay the rent. She told him that was not entirely true. And at some point in those clips, he said something that should have stopped the earth from turning. Something that no person should ever say to someone they claim to care about. He told her he could shoot her if she did not leave. He did not have a gun in his hand. He had a spear. But the message was the same message that abusers have been sending for generations. The message that says, I have the power to end you, and you should be afraid of me. Silvia was afraid, but she did not run. Maybe she thought running would make it worse. Maybe she thought if she kept the camera rolling, kept talking, kept the evidence alive, someone would see it. Maybe she simply had nowhere to go. The camera kept recording until it stopped. The exact sequence of what happened in the final moments before the camera cut out is something that investigators would spend months trying to reconstruct. The video ended. The room went silent in the sense that no more footage was being captured. But what had already been recorded was enough. When the 911 call came in shortly after the dispatcher heard voices that were not calm, when the officers arrived, they found the apartment door. They found the hallway. They found the bedroom. And they found Silvia. She was on the floor. A friend who had been present during some portion of the evening was already there kneeling beside her, pushing on her chest with both hands, doing what desperate people do when medical help feels too far away and there is nothing left to lose by trying. The spear had gone through her chest, not across her skin, not a surface wound, through her chest. She was 32 years old and she was not breathing on her own. In the doorway of that bedroom, the world Silvia Galva had known came to an end. Bodycam footage does not lie about the atmosphere it walks into. When the first officers arrived at that apartment in Broward County in the early hours of July 28, 2019, their body cameras captured exactly what the scene looked like before anyone had a chance to clean it or explain it or soften it. There was blood. There was Silvia on the floor unconscious, her body already beginning that terrible stillness that bodies take on when the fight inside them is losing. There was a friend trying to keep her heart going by hand. There was a spear. And there was Adam Crespo. He was not hiding. He was not gone. He was there in the apartment, and he was talking. He had been talking, it seems, since the moment he realized the situation was beyond his control. He had already assembled his explanation before the first officer walked through the door. People who have studied interrogation and crisis response for years will tell you that the first story a person tells after a traumatic or violent event is one of the most revealing things you will ever hear. Not because it is necessarily false, but because the way someone tells that story, what they choose to include, what they choose to emphasize, what order they put things in, tells you something about how they are experiencing what just happened. Adam's first story was simple. It was an accident. He said he had been trying to remove Silvia from the bedroom. He said she did not want to go. He said he was pulling her, attempting to physically move her out of the room. And during that struggle, Silvia had grabbed onto the spear that was mounted near the bed. He said the spear had broken. He said the broken end had gone into her chest, not because of anything he did, but because of how she had positioned herself, how she had grabbed the weapon, how physics and bad luck had conspired to create the worst possible outcome from what was simply an effort to get her out of the room. He wanted the officers to understand. It was a terrible accident. That was his story. The officers listened. They took it in. They continued their work. Silvia was transported by paramedics with urgency. She was taken to a hospital where medical teams would do everything possible. She died from her injuries. And now the case belonged to investigators who would spend the coming weeks asking a single question. Was Adam Crespo's story true? The interrogation room is a specific kind of space. It is designed to feel neutral. Plain walls, plain table, plain chairs. Nothing on the walls to look at. No windows to let the mind drift. The lighting is steady and slightly harsh. Everything about the room says there is nowhere else to go. This is where we are. This is what we are doing. Adam Crespo sat in that room, and he did not look like a man who had just lost his girlfriend. That observation requires some care. Grief looks different on different people. Shock creates unusual presentations. Some people go very still. Some people talk too much. Some people become oddly practical and focused on details because the alternative is to feel something they cannot yet afford to feel. But investigators are trained to pay attention to all of it. The detective assigned to lead the interview came in prepared. He had already seen the body cam footage from the scene. He had already been briefed on the phone video that Silvia herself had recorded. He had a picture of the bedroom. He had a sense of the timeline. And he had 49 years of Adam Crespo's life to draw from, including the way Adam had spoken to the first officers, the story he had chosen to tell, and the specific details he had reached for when the pressure was on. The detective started where all good interrogators start, with the easy part. Tell me about your evening. Tell me how the night began. Walk me through it from the beginning like you are explaining it to someone who knows nothing. Adam talked. He talked about the bar. He talked about the ride home. He talked about the disagreement that started once they were inside the apartment. He kept his voice level. He kept the story tight. He maintained the posture of a man who had nothing to hide because everything he was saying was the truth. The detective listened and did not react. Then he asked about the bedroom. Then he asked about the spear. And then something happened that happens in many interrogations when a person has built their account around a version of events that does not fully match the physical evidence. The story started to develop small inconsistencies, not lies necessarily, not obvious contradictions, just the kind of micro-variations that appear when someone is reconstructing events from a chosen narrative rather than from pure memory. Small shifts in where Adam was standing, small adjustments to how Silvia had moved. The kind of details that shift slightly each time you tell a story because you are filling in gaps with logic rather than with what you actually saw. The detective noted all of it. He would return to each of those points later. But for now, he let Adam talk. Because the longer Adam talked, the more complete the picture became. And the picture was not matching the story. In his interrogation, Adam Crespo maintained his core claim throughout. He was trying to remove her. She resisted. The spear broke. The blade struck her. He did not mean for any of this to happen. He admitted to the argument. He did not dispute that the argument had been heated. He acknowledged that tensions had been running high between them. He even acknowledged when pressed that there had been disputes before, that theirs was not always a peaceful relationship, that things between them had sometimes escalated further than they should have. But what he did not say was just as telling as what he did. He did not volunteer information about the spear in his hands during the recorded portion of the argument. He did not address the video that Silvia had been recording. He did not explain the comment about shooting her. He waited to be asked rather than offering context. He operated in a mode of controlled disclosure, sharing the minimum necessary to maintain his version of events without adding anything that might complicate it. This is a recognized pattern. Investigators who work domestic violence cases have a term for it, though not always the same term. It is the strategic omission. The person being questioned is not lying outright. They are selecting. They are choosing which facts to place in the light and which to leave in the shadow, trusting that if they can control the narrative of what is volunteered, they can shape the interpretation of what follows. Adam's central claim that Silvia grabbed the spear herself, that it broke, that the blade entered her by the mechanics of her own grip and her own positioning, was not an implausible story on its face. Accidents happen in moments of physical struggle. People get hurt in ways that no one intended. The problem was not that the story was impossible. The problem was that the evidence did not support it, and the evidence was about to speak for itself. Forensic science is patient. It does not have an agenda. It does not care about what version of events sounds more sympathetic or more plausible. It looks at the physical world and it asks one question. Does this match what we were told? In the case of Silvia Galva, forensic investigators were given two things to work with. They had the phone video Silvia had recorded. They had the body cam footage from the scene. They had the physical evidence of the bedroom itself, the blood patterns, the position of the broken spear, the injury on Silvia's body. And they had Adam's account. Their job was to compare them. The wound told a story. The angle of the penetrating injury, the depth of it, the direction of the blade's path through Silvia's chest, all of these things can be analyzed by a medical examiner and a forensic specialist working together. When they did that analysis, what they found did not match the scenario Adam had described. For Silvia to have been injured the way she was injured with the force that was used at the angle that was recorded by her body, the spear could not have simply broken and fallen into her. The blade did not graze. It did not nick. It penetrated with force, with directional force, the kind of force that requires a driving motion, not a falling motion. A spear that breaks and falls does not travel in the same direction as a spear that is pushed. The physics were not cooperative with Adam's account. The scene reconstruction added another layer. Investigators brought in specialists to walk through the geometry of the bedroom, where Adam said he was standing, where Silvia would have had to be, what angle the spear would have traveled, how the break in the weapon shaft was consistent or inconsistent with the described scenario, how much force would have been required, whether the injury profile matched a person who had grabbed a weapon and fallen versus a person who had been struck by one. Every analysis pointed in the same direction, and it was not the direction Adam had indicated. Then there was Silvia's own recording. Forensic audio and video enhancement teams went through every second of what she had captured on her phone. They analyzed tone, they analyzed language, they analyzed the physical behavior visible in frame. They cataloged every moment where a spear was visible, where Adam's hands were visible, where his posture and positioning told them something about the sequence of events. The video did not show an accident waiting to happen. It showed a man with a weapon in a room with a woman who was trying to get out in an argument that had escalated far beyond what any version of a reasonable dispute should look like. Taken together, the forensic analysis, the scene reconstruction, and the video evidence created a body of proof that was difficult to explain away. It was also deeply difficult to experience, because the footage Silvia had captured was not just evidence. It was a record of her final hours made by her own hand because she had understood that this night might require a witness. She had been right, and the investigators were going to make sure that witness was heard. Adam Crespo was arrested and charged. The original charge brought against him was second-degree murder. In Florida law, second-degree murder refers to an unlawful killing that is not premeditated, but that results from an act imminently dangerous to another person demonstrating a depraved indifference to human life. It is the charge that says you may not have planned this weeks in advance, but what you did was not an accident, and the recklessness with which you acted showed a complete disregard for whether another person lived or died. Second-degree murder carries a maximum sentence of life in prison in Florida. Adam Crespo did not initially accept the charge. He entered a plea of not guilty. His legal team prepared a defense built around the accident narrative. They were going to argue that the physical evidence was being misinterpreted, that the forensic reconstruction left room for doubt, that the death of Silvia Galva, while undeniably tragic, was not a crime in the legal sense because it was not an intentional act. That defense never made it to trial. As the case developed and the evidence continued to be processed and refined and presented in pretrial proceedings, Adam Crespo's position shifted. He changed his plea. He entered what is called a no-contest plea, which in the American legal system means the defendant does not admit guilt, but also does not dispute the evidence presented against them. It is not the same as saying I did it. It is also not the same as saying I did not do it. It is in a very specific legal sense, a way of accepting the consequences of the charge without making a formal admission. In the context of this case, in the context of the evidence that had been assembled, including a video made by the victim herself, a no-contest plea to second-degree murder was not a declaration of innocence. The judge accepted the plea. Adam Crespo was sentenced to life in prison. He will not be eligible for parole. He was 49 years old when Silvia died. He will grow old and he will die inside a Florida correctional facility. His freedom, whatever remained of it at 49, ended in that bedroom in Broward County on the night he picked up that spear. And Silvia Galva, who was 32 years old and had her whole life ahead of her, ended there too. Justice in this case arrived, but justice arriving does not undo what was lost. It never does. The interrogation of Adam Crespo, when you watch it in full, is a study in something that behavioral psychologists and law enforcement trainers spend years trying to teach people to recognize. It is a study in how people maintain control even when control is slipping. Adam did not fall apart in that room. He did not weep uncontrollably. He did not become hostile or explosive. He did not start telling wildly implausible stories that collapsed under the first question. He was composed. He was cooperative on the surface. He maintained the body language of a man who understood the gravity of the situation and was doing his best to help. This is worth paying attention to because it challenges a popular idea about guilt. The popular idea is that guilty people act guilty, that they sweat, that their eyes move in certain ways, that they have trouble maintaining their story, that they become visibly distressed when confronted with evidence. There is some truth to this in some cases, but it is far from a reliable rule. Behavioral analysis of the Crespo interrogation reveals something more specific. It reveals a man who was managing the interaction. His language choices were careful. When he described the struggle with Silvia, he consistently used passive constructions. Things happen. The spear broke. The injury occurred. Very rarely did he say, "I did this specific thing at this specific moment." The active voice, the direct personal ownership of an action, was largely absent from his account. This is a recognized verbal behavior pattern associated with distancing. When people describe events in which they bear direct responsibility, they sometimes unconsciously or consciously shift to passive or indirect language as a way of creating grammatical distance between themselves and the action. I pushed her becomes she fell. I drove the spear becomes the spear went through her. The detective, to his credit, caught several of these shifts and circled back to them. He asked Adam to be specific, to use direct language, to say exactly in first person what his hands were doing and when. Each time Adam was pressed into direct language, the story became slightly less smooth. The confidence that came with the prepared narrative began to show small cracks. Not enormous admissions, not dramatic moments of confession, just the ordinary friction of a story that has been constructed rather than remembered. There is also the issue of what Adam did not show. In the entire interrogation across a session that lasted several hours in total, the emotional register that was largely missing was grief. There were moments of what looked like concern about his own situation. There were moments of what appeared to be frustration when questions felt repetitive or accusatory. There were moments of surface-level reflection and on the tragedy of the situation. But the sustained, uncontrolled, physically present grief of a person who has just watched someone they loved die in a bedroom they shared. Investigators noted its absence. Grief is not evidence of innocence, nor is its absence evidence of guilt. But in the full picture, combined with the physical evidence, combined with the video Silvia had recorded, combined with the account he gave of his own actions with a 5-foot bladed weapon in a locked room with a woman who was trying to argue for her right to be there, the picture was not complicated. It was devastating. We need to pause here, because it would be very easy in the telling of a case like this to let Silvia Galva become a name attached to a tragedy. A statistic, a photograph in a news article, the victim in a headline. She was not a statistic. She was not a prop in someone else's story. She was Silvia. She was Brazilian. She had come to the United States, to Florida, the way many people come to a new country, with some combination of hope and uncertainty, and the belief that what lay ahead was worth the difficulty of getting there. She was 32 years old, which means she had already lived through things. She had made mistakes and learned from some of them. She had built relationships. She had the kind of laugh, by all accounts, from people who knew her that settled a room. The kind of presence that people gravitated toward without always being able to explain why. She was not a perfect person. No one is. She was a real person, which means she was complicated and full and still very much in the process of becoming whoever she was going to be. She had a future, not an abstract hypothetical future, an actual future with specific plans and specific people in it, with things she wanted to do in places she had not yet been, and mornings she had not yet woken up to. She is not here to tell us what those plans were. But she was here on the night of July 27th, 2019, and she was trying. She was trying to hold her ground in an argument. She was trying to keep herself safe with a camera. She was trying to stay in the only home she had. She did not succeed, and that failure was not hers. It was something that was done to her by someone who chose to pick up a weapon in a moment of anger and not put it down. In the final moments of the video she recorded, you can hear her voice. It is not the voice of a woman who has given up. It is the voice of a woman who believed that if she stayed calm, if she kept talking, if she kept the record running, she would make it through the night. She believed in that possibility right up until the moment she could not believe in anything anymore. That matters. Silvia Galva believed she could survive that night. We honor that by saying her name with the full weight of who she was. Not a victim, not a tragedy, not a cautionary tale. Silvia, 32 years old, present, real, gone. Every case carries a lesson if you are willing to look at it directly. Not a lesson that reduces the tragedy to a teachable moment. Not a lesson that implies the victim could have done something differently to prevent what happened. But a lesson about systems, about patterns, about the way violence inside relationships operates in the open while remaining invisible to the people most positioned to intervene. The first lesson is about escalation. Domestic violence rarely begins with a weapon. It begins with control, with arguments about money, about space, about who gets to make decisions and who does not. It builds through patterns of behavior that individually look like relationship conflict and collectively look like something else entirely. By the time a spear is in someone's hand, the escalation has been happening for a long time. The people around Adam and Silvia, the friends, the acquaintances, the bar patrons who saw them that evening, were not evil. They were ordinary people who saw what looked like an ordinary, if sometimes tense, relationship between two adults. They did not see the bedroom with the spears on the wall. They did not see the arguments that ended with one person afraid to leave and the other person unwilling to let them stay. They did not see the pattern because patterns are designed to look from the outside like isolated incidents. The second lesson is about weapons in the home. The spears on that bedroom wall were there before the argument started. They were there as decoration, as objects chosen and hung and left in place as part of the aesthetic of a room. No one had placed them there in anticipation of violence. But objects in spaces of conflict become part of the conflict. When the temperature rises, what is within reach becomes what is possible. A weapon within reach becomes a weapon within reach. The physical environment of a volatile relationship is not neutral. Everything in it is part of the dynamic. The third lesson is about documentation. Silvia Galva picked up her phone and started recording because she understood something that many people in dangerous situations do not yet understand. She understood that if something happened to her, her own voice might be the most powerful evidence that remained. She was right. Her video did not save her life, but it told the truth about her death in ways that no other single piece of evidence could have. It showed the context of the argument. It showed the weapon. It showed her attempts to reason, to de-escalate, to hold the space open for something other than violence. It showed who she was in those moments. Advocates for domestic violence victims have increasingly encouraged documentation as one tool in a larger safety strategy. A video alone cannot protect you. A recording alone cannot guarantee justice. But evidence carefully preserved can outlast the events that created it. Silvia's phone outlasted that night, and the footage on it helped put the person responsible for her death in prison for the rest of his life. The fourth lesson is about the people who come after. Silvia had a friend in that apartment, a friend who tried to perform CPR on her while waiting for the paramedics, a friend who witnessed parts of what happened, a friend who had to carry that night forward. The people who survive these situations, not as primary victims, but as witnesses and bystanders, and those left behind, carry a weight that rarely gets acknowledged. They did not cause what happened. They could not have stopped it in most cases, but they live with it. If you know someone in a relationship that concerns you, you do not have to have a perfect plan. You do not have to know exactly what to say. You do not have to have all the answers about when and how and what to do next. You just have to stay. Stay in contact. Stay available. Stay the kind of person they can call when things get bad. Because sometimes that is the entire difference between someone having a witness and someone being alone. Adam Crespo is in prison. He will not be leaving. A court in Florida reviewed the evidence, accepted his no contest plea, and impose a sentence of life in prison for the second-degree murder of Silvia Galva. Whatever future Adam Crespo might have imagined for himself ended on the same night Silvia's did. That is the outcome of this case in legal terms. But a case like this asks more of us than a legal conclusion. It asks us to consider what we miss, what we normalize, what we look past because looking directly at it is uncomfortable, and we have been trained by culture and habit and the ordinary self-protection of living among other people to assume that what happens behind closed doors is not our concern unless someone tells us otherwise. Silvia Galva did not wait to be asked. She pressed record. She held the camera steady in a room where a man was holding a weapon and threatening her. She gave us the most direct possible form of testimony. And still, she did not survive the night. That is the fact that should stay with us, not as paralysis, not as hopelessness, but as clarity. This is not something that happens somewhere else to people who made obvious mistakes in circumstances too extreme to recognize in ordinary life. It happens in apartments in Broward County, Florida. It happens after a night out. It happens during an argument about rent. It happens in bedrooms decorated with objects that seemed harmless until someone was angry enough to reach for them. It happens in ordinary spaces. That is the terrifying thing. And the only response to terrifying things is to stop looking away. To take domestic violence seriously before the 911 call, not after. To recognize the early patterns, the arguments about control, the moments where someone's right to be in a space is being weaponized against them. To be the person who stays in contact. To be the person who asks the uncomfortable question. To be the person who believes someone when they say they are afraid, even if they cannot fully articulate why. Silvia Galva used the only tool available to her in those final hours. She made a record. She left a testimony. She trusted that the truth documented and preserved would outlast the night. It did. We owe her the same kind of witness she gave to her own story. We owe her our attention. We owe her the conversation that might keep someone else from making the call she never got to make. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, the National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week at 1-800-7-997-233. You can also text START to 88788. All calls are confidential. Her name was Silvia Galva. She was 32 years old. She is remembered